So we're going to do a little bit of a round of introductions. I'll go last, but why don't we start with you, Rachana, about your background and your experience working with distributed teams, and then we'll get into your journey at Etsy.
Sure. Thanks, David. Hi, all. I'm Rachana Kumar. I'm VP of Engineering at Etsy. I currently oversee both the mobile and web teams on product engineering. And I'm also just starting a new role as MD of Mexico as well at Etsy. What that means is we will start to hire and grow our engineering and product teams in Mexico. And remote distributed teams journey is, we were always a very remote friendly team till I would say, beginning of 2020, about 30% of my team was distributed, mostly only within the US. But through 2020, of course, all of us have been distributed, and we also started adding teams in Mexico. Dave?
Yeah. Dave, if you could go, that'd be great.
Yeah, great. Hey, everyone. Thanks for being here today, listening to us talk. So for anyone that's not familiar with Bleacher Report, Bleacher Report exists to make it as easy as possible to be a sports fan. So no matter where you are, no matter which distribution format you prefer, BR is there for you. So we have about 20 million app downloads lifetime. About half of our user base uses those native apps, with our remaining users on mobile web and social. In terms of our journey to distributed, which you're gonna be hearing a lot more about today, I joined BR back in 2015, and one of the things that I was tasked with initially was rebuilding and growing the Eng org. And the team has grown about 5x since then, and it just wouldn't have been possible without embracing a distributed team. When I joined, engineering had always been based in San Francisco, and the first 2 years of our hiring were really focused primarily on finding talent in the Bay Area. But as anyone, probably many of you in the area who have tried to hire solely in the Bay Area, it's a challenge, right? Companies willing to offer titles, comp, perks, you name it. And so we made a decision a few years back, pre-COVID, to start looking for candidates everywhere and embracing distributed team. And in doing so, we increased that candidate pool exponentially. And we found talent that is not only incredible, but incredibly enthusiastic about working for Bleacher Report, which is the most important thing in my eyes. 2 years ago, we took things a step further, and we embraced what we call our partner developer, kind of a staff aug model, bringing in engineers from Andela and some other partners, and that's been a really great success for us. So today we have engineers across the United States, on the African continent, and in Brazil.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachana and Dave. Maybe just a quick intro of myself. I've been on the journey to remote and distributed for well over a decade. I worked at LogMeIn, where we started with remote access to computers, which really started a whole bunch of screen sharing tools. And really, we were trying to serve our customers who wanted to have flexibility where they worked and access things. I went to a small startup after that. We had to compete against great name brand companies, and we were trying to recruit. And one of the best tools we found was offering a remote or distributed work environment so that we could get the talent we wanted. And then I joined Andela well over 2 years ago, and we really helped to solve the problem around adding and building engineering teams, right? It's always hard, right? You're trying to find talent, you're trying to meet your roadmaps, and you're resource constrained, and it's really a thankless job of recruiting and finding and assessing and getting the right match of talent to support your team. So we like to think of ourselves as the easy button for an engineering team to help kind of augment their resources on that. And we're only as good as our engineering team, so we've actually cultivated talent in a lot of really interesting places, like Kenya or Nigeria or Kigali, Rwanda, or places around the world that people think are overlooked, but there's tremendous talent there. So that's a little bit about my stuff and my journey. So we are confident that you're going to learn something today, and we will deliver on that promise. We have lots of good things to share, and please, just to call out, we have a Q&A form. You can vote up questions and answers. We're going to do a couple pre-scripted questions in the beginning, and then we'll open up the floor to answering some of the questions from all of you. So Dave, you talked a little bit about why embracing distributed, and it was opening up the talent pool. Rachana, is there anything else you want to add about like your journey and why you considered it? Were there other considerations? I talked about just I was trying to compete against name brand companies, and like we were a small startup that didn't have any recognition. So maybe you have something to add as to the why or the business case.
Sure, David. I think I've been at Etsy for 7 years now, so I've kind of been through the startup, through going public and rapidly scaling the whole phase. When I joined Etsy, the engineering team was less than 100 people. We are including contractors. We are about over 600 people now, so we've scaled rapidly in that time. So the way we always had offices in a couple of locations in the Bay Area, in SF, and in New York. We are headquartered in New York. Then we added Dublin, and we had engineers in all these 3 locations almost from the time I have been there. But a couple of reasons we started looking more actively remotely. One is like a few engineers at Etsy wanted to go remote. That's how it kind of kicked off. Employees who were in SF and Bay Area wanted to move to Midwest or somewhere else in the US. And once that started happening, once we started approving people there, we were also like, or to get really senior engineers, we were only looking for like staff and senior plus engineers. We're like, it's a good way to get talent when we wanted to scale rapidly, and hiring started getting really hard, and hiring especially senior engineers started getting really hard. We were like, if we are letting our own employees go remote, like we can start looking in those areas there are anywhere else in the US for that matter. And it was similar to both of you, really trying to solve a hiring problem that we have, that because we are in 2 saturated markets like SF and New York. So we started looking at mostly very senior engineers and like specialists. Then once we saw success there, it started becoming more flexible. We still used to hire graduates out of college as remote till 2020 happened, but now everything is different, of course.
Yeah, of course. All right. So you've heard a few motivations: increasing talent pool, a way to recruit, employees. Employee satisfaction and retention. So look, the world has gone remote with COVID. We all know that. So now let's move into a little bit of what we can do to up our game. So I'd love to ask each of you, what's working well, and like, what do you feel like you've overcome and really nailed as an engineering leader to kind of drive your productive distributed teams? So maybe Dave, you want to start with that question?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I'll preface this answer by saying, despite us, embracing a distributed team approach for a long time, I still feel like it's a work in progress. I feel like everything is a work in progress. If you go back to when we first started hiring folks remote, they would tell you that I would get on calls with them and say, how are we doing? Like, how does it feel? And there'd be times where they tell me like, it's great, like we're getting what we need, and I really don't feel this disconnect. I said, like, I just don't believe it. We can be doing better. So that's my mentality going into it. So just keep that in mind when I answer this. Even pre-COVID, I think that it can be a challenging transition for anybody, right? And it's really important to be explicit about embracing a distributed team culture. It means that nobody's left out of anything. Everything that you do, from meetings to team building events, needs to feel inclusive of everyone. And in a COVID world where most companies have had to find their way and embrace distributed teams, there's a difference between just tolerating it and embracing it. And I think that, we all need to ask ourselves, which are we doing? Are we tolerating it, or are we embracing it and really tailoring, the work experience and the things that we're doing, for our remote employees? Tolerating is about finding ways to compensate. And again, embracing is about looking at the things that you're doing and asking if they're optimal for everyone. And if they're not, going and changing those things. And I'll also say there's two lenses to look through. There's the operational lens, which is how do we operate? How do we conduct our meetings? What sorts of artifacts are we creating? And how are we distributing those and making sure that everyone has the same information? And then also the cultural angle to it, which is, does everyone feel like they are part of the team? Do folks feel isolated? And if they do, it's our responsibility as leaders to make sure that we're taking the steps to address that.
Great. Rachana, how about you? How have you, as you think about what are you doing really well? Any advice that you want to share or tidbits that could be useful?
Yeah. I think I've almost, from the time I started my management career, which was over a decade ago, or even longer, much longer than that, I've always had distributed teams up to a certain extent. The first team I was project I was overseeing as a manager had engineers and product team between US, India, and Moscow, and it was one of those multiple time zones, even within US, East Coast and West Coast. There were so many time zones. Actually, that project didn't go well, and I felt like I learned so much from how to manage what to look out for in such a distributed team for the future. And this is the time I'm talking about. There was no video conferencing. Similarly, there was not, technologies didn't exist. Right. There was no Slack. Similarly, in terms of technology to be ready to be remote, we were so far behind then, and it was very challenging. But fast forwarding it to Etsy, because again, at Etsy, all the teams, even I started as a frontline manager at Etsy, I'm VP now, but even the first team I managed, the tech lead, who was the senior most IC on the team, was remote, and rest of the team was in New York. And I think what has worked well, specifically for 2020, it's been a lot of work. We've always put in, almost from the time I've been at Etsy, or even longer than I was there, to have remote workforce that feels as much part of the company, integral to the culture and integral to the success of the company like anybody else, right? One of the things we always had, even I'm talking about 2014 when I first joined Etsy, was we'll always do video meetings, even if it's only one person on video, and we will take turns and kind of pay attention to those people. So we always had a very, I think the remotes at Etsy are also fantastic, because the first few people who went remote at Etsy was already existing senior engineers. They documented everything. They have a very good support system. So we had put in many years of work to arrive at 2020 in terms of culture and onboarding people remotely and making sure business continuation and the culture is there. So I think that's what really helped us in 2020.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great things there that we could certainly explore further. I think from Dave's perspective, he's talking about how you have to have the operational approach. You have to be deliberate about what are in-person meetings, what are asynchronous. I think, Rachana, you're talking about having the right mindset. I think you're talking about the tooling. I would also concur from my perspective. I think one of the things that we've done really well is we've gotten our tooling in place. We know we have a wiki for documentation. We know we have the right backlog management tool. We have the messaging system that we need. And I would say one of the things that I think we'll tease out some more, I know everyone on this panel has some comments on it, but I think for my team personally, we also feel like we've really nailed onboarding, right? In the old world where you're all in the office, if you needed help with something, you just ask the person next to you, or hey, how do I get logged into this? Or where do I find the creds for that? Or I need some documentation, or whatever it is. And we've really structured our onboarding so that people have a set of people they're talking to on day one. They have documentation to read in advance. They're pair programming on, day 4. They're submitting code on day 5, and like it's a very structured process, and it's very deliberate because you have to, because you don't have that osmosis of people around you. So I would say that that's something that we've done well, and we'll explore that a little bit further. But there's also lots of tools, and feel free to ask questions about like what's your favorite tool in the questions. We might ask that or explore that. Okay, so we're doing some things well. We've all been had some experience. Now let's get a little bit real with the audience. I think it's useful that if we maybe open ourselves up a little bit, and I think Dave said this, you're a work in progress, and you're always a work in progress, no matter what you're building. We take the agile mentality, not just to the products we build, but how we run our teams. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's not working well, or what you're trying to solve. Like maybe you have a specific focus on something because it has some friction, or you're trying to do something better in a certain area, because I think that will help shed some light on like some of the challenges we face. And so love to kind of get your thoughts on that. And, maybe I'll start with you, Dave, to answer that one.
Yeah, so 2 things for you here. Number one, pre-COVID, we had our engineering team distributed as I described, but our product and design teams, who we work very closely with, were still based here in San Francisco. And they, all being in the San Francisco office and having an engineering team that's distributed, could sometimes be challenging. The folks in San Francisco would favor grabbing a room to work things out, whereas, in a distributed team environment, you really want to favor that asynchronous communication, and you want to optimize again for getting folks on video calls if those sorts of discussions are going to take place. So there was definitely an adjustment there. I felt like we were making good progress against it, and getting everyone to really empathize with those remote folks and understand what they're missing out on, the importance again of kind of going out of your way to make sure that they're included in everything, despite it being so much easier to just jump in a conference room and kind of work something through. We got to cheat, right? COVID leveled the playing field there, right? Our product and design teams were kind of propelled into a distributed world, and that problem, if it was a problem, went away. The second one, I think, again, in the spirit of ongoing improvement, is I think about our responsibility as leaders to make sure that our remote workers don't feel isolated. In an office environment, you can do the desk drop by, see how folks are doing, what's happening, all that. Not as easy in a remote world, right? And we're probably all now dealing with situations where we have employees that are working remote that didn't sign up to work remote, right? It's one thing to apply for a job and know that I'm going to be remote and I'm going to do the things that I need to do in terms of having a place to work where, I can concentrate, the tools that I need, my communication style, like I'm prepared to do all this stuff. And it's different when people are forced into that world. And we as managers, whether you're an engineering manager or not, need to go out of our way to make sure that we're connecting with these folks and understanding how they're feeling and how things are going. So that's definitely, I would say, an ongoing challenge or an ongoing area of focus. And the solution is lots of communication.
Yeah, really insightful. You're exactly right. COVID forced remote on a lot of people, and some companies aren't turning back, right? They're going to stay remote forever. And like, what happens to that employee who really craved the in-office interaction? So communication is key to that, no question. Rachana, how about you? What do you feel like is stuff that you're working on to improve some of the things that you are being deliberate about addressing for optimizing your distributed team?
Yeah. I think 2 things have been challenging at a super high level, and a lot of things needs improvement, but like if I have to focus on a couple of them, I would say connections for new people, and the second one is kind of completely unfamiliar greenfield projects. I can elaborate on both of them. What I mean by connections for new people is the great thing, one thing I really enjoy working at Etsy is like it's a very people-centric culture. And in the past, there were so many organic things for people to connect with each other at either in offices or even for remote employees. All our remotes spend 1 week, a quarter in any of the offices, like based on where their team is. And I used to plan all my offsites and any brainstorming, any like large fun activities around the time all the remotes are in town, right? Like, so everything used to be kind of planned around that. But I get a little concerned for the new people who are joining the company. Some of them are very extroverted. Like I hired a director last year. He naturally like is very good at connecting with people, and he will reach out. And some people are intrinsically not that way. And even when I think of myself, right, like I used to, if there are social events at Etsy, we have this employee resource group, and they throw a lot of events and fun things. So when that used to happen, it used to be around 5:30. That's the time I'm also getting a little hungry. I'm like, oh, I'll grab a snack, get a drink, and just say hi to a few people and leave. But like it still happens. People are very conscious. They're still organizing those events. But at like 5:30, my son is hovering and he's not having me in remote like meetings anymore. He wants me to go and play with him. So, and it's also, I have to think about dinner, like because I'm hungry, there is no food at the event either, right? Like I'm talking very practically. So as someone who's been there for so long and in a leadership position, if I am finding moments to like connect more broadly outside my team, I'm just more concerned for the new people that, that we have to deliberately see how they can connect to employees outside their team to the broader company and understand what's happening. I think broad perspective is important for everyone. And the second greenfield project, I was like, what I mean by that is like, as an example, the Mexico project I'm working on, as ideally, hopefully I will still get to go to Mexico later in this year, but like, who knows, right? But to kind of drive a project in a new country that I'm not very familiar with, there is language and culture and so many other etiquettes that you need to understand in a culture. They're doing all that remotely, and especially because we have offices in other countries, like we have offices in 6 other countries, but this is a completely new culture and a country for me to figure out all that along with everybody else in the company. Almost every function in the company is involved in that. If it had to be in person, I feel like because there are cultural nuances, it would have been easier. But I'm trying to learn it in other ways, from like, talking to people there, of course, reading books, but I feel like it's not the same necessarily.
Yeah, always. Look, I think there's a theme here of like, if we're going to be great at distributed, we got to connect as people, and like you're navigating some of that. Awesome. All right. So I see that there's a bunch of questions piling up. We're going to cover one more and then we'll get to the floor. And I think this is kind of an important one that does speak to sort of that theme of like, we need to connect as humans. And that is, how do you think about culture? How do you drive the right culture? And maybe are there some things you're doing that help you take a pulse on it, or just give us some advice? Because I think what you've both have said is like, you got to be deliberate, right? And we'll hear that again and again. So maybe Dave, how are you thinking about driving the right culture for your team?
Yeah, so I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction. I'll give you a straight answer and say, I think it's about, expectations. And I think, going through the hiring process, being very transparent with folks about what it's going to be like to work at Bleacher Report, right? It's one of the things that we focus on, is giving them an opportunity to talk with a variety of people across a variety of departments, so that they get a sense for what things are going to be like on day one. And then when they start, again, setting those expectations, and really starting that bonding. And that's where I want to take this question, which is, some of the things that we do to try and bond the team and, build a culture outside of, certainly working towards, the same goals and, what we're trying to do, product-wise. We bring folks together, or we did pre-COVID, and we'll do it again for these biannual jamborees. So twice a year, we get people together. The first half of the year, we would typically have the entire team come to San Francisco, and we plan, 2 or 3 days of events, go to, a Warriors basketball game, certainly dinners and fun stuff like that. And it was so fantastic to meet these, to meet people that we've hired that you haven't met in real life, right? I always get a trip out of it. I remember there was somebody that we hired and I worked with for a while. And he came to San Francisco for the first time, and I walked in the office. And I was like, "You're like 7 feet tall, right? Like you can't tell. You see everyone sitting down on conference calls, and it just I was like slack-jawed. So there's always those kind of fun things. The second half of the year, we give our engineering teams individual budgets to go and plan an offsite someplace. So take your team, work with them, and figure out where do you all want to go and go do something. And it's certainly not a blank check, but I like to think that there's been some special things that the teams have been able to go do together. And I think it really makes more of a difference than you might realize. You work with folks day in and day out, in this distributed world. Getting a chance to spend some face time and really get to know them it is huge. The other thing that we do is, and this goes back to the earlier question, is in the spirit of making sure that everyone's included, team building events that include our distributed team members. And my favorite one that we did was about 2 years ago. We did a hot sauce eating challenge, if you've ever seen hot ones on YouTube. And we went and we collected these 5 hot sauces, and one of our engineering managers made these individual packets, and we mailed it to everyone that wanted to participate. You did not have to participate. And in full disclosure, I did not participate. We mailed, at least I didn't try the hot sauces. So we mailed them to everyone, no matter where they were. And we all got on a Zoom call and we watched folks try these hot sauces together. And it was absolutely hysterical. I mean, you can, the trust building exercises and escape rooms that you do are great for bonding, but nothing brings a team together like seeing a colleague sweating bullets, or there was somebody that was hugging a fan. Other people were chugging milk. I think a couple people were crying. Remember, they signed up, they volunteered to do this. Somebody was laying on the floor, just moaning. And that's how you bond people. Those are the things that we still laugh about because everyone survived it. So yeah, look for those types of events. They really resonate.
That's awesome, Dave. I think I'm detecting a little bit of a theme here around food. Dave wants to burn your face off with hot sauce, and I think for Rachana, we need to schedule Uber Eats for her to be delivered right at 5:30. So awesome stuff. Rachana, how about you? What do you do that really works on culture to drive the culture you want?
Yeah.
Tell us more.
I'll focus more on what we have done while everyone is remote, because I felt like Dave had a lot of great tips about kind of also when we hopefully all get back soon, the things we could be doing. But talking about tall people, I started working with a new product VP, his VP of shipping last year. I've never met him. And someone told me he's the tallest person in the company. I was like my mind was blown, right? I had never guessed he would be the tallest person in the company, even though I talk to him on a daily basis. So yes, I will discover maybe a lot of tall people in 2021 when I meet them. But at a high level for fully distributed teams, I think in 2020 and even now, few things I've focused on as kind of one is doubling down on what are our values and what do we really care about as a company, right? Because when we are all under stress between a pandemic, many socio-political events, and again, hyper growth as a business, it can seem so stressful. And if we double down on what are our values, what do we care about? One of the things that we really care is having flexibility for people and employees being empathetic to each other. So, and for me, how do we make sure that stays consistent throughout the year? Because there is so much uncertainty around everyone, right? So one of the things I did in March or April when we went all remote, and I've tried to stick to it, is there are overall about 20 managers in my group, either directors or senior directors report to me, and all these managers report to them. Kind of making sure there is constant and open communication directly with all the 20 people, because all these engineering managers are the cultural ambassadors for their teams. And in the beginning, when no one was having any idea what's happening with the pandemic and all those things, we met, like, say, not necessarily it has to be a meeting, but I was checking in with them on a daily basis and communicating everything I know that I can legally possibly communicate transparently about what's happening in the company, what's happening with the business, what's our plan to support remote employees, as transparently, as frequently as possible. And I have tried to keep some version of it throughout the year. And I think, especially if there are challenges, if someone's feeling burnt out or they need a mental health day, like, then Etsy instituted a policy where once a month we give people extra day off as a company to take a mental break. But also, we really encourage employees to be open and transparent to their managers about, if they feel under pressure or if they need time off, keeping the same, and also showing vulnerability as a leader. So it's like, if I say, like, oh, today, for the next 3 months, my son's school is shut down and I need flexibility in my schedule, and sorry, like, this is my availability and we'll figure out as a team. I feel like that kind of being vulnerable also trickles down to all the managers and ICs in the group as well. That's one thing we focused on. And, like, first was communication. 2 is, like, bringing your true self to work. And even as a leader, you're a human, being vulnerable, I think really helped in keeping the culture solid and at the same time driving the business forward.
Yeah, I think there's a good lesson there about modeling for your teams. I think there's a great lesson there about transparency. You have to be really transparent because, one lesson I've learned in my career, if you want your team to do well, they need context, and, like, transparency really helps with that. If I could offer 2 things around culture, one is very tactical. We've really leaned in hard to doing hackathons. So at the end of every release, we take a week off and do a hackathon. And it's just a great way for the team to blow off steam. It's a great way for the team to work across teams with other people that they don't normally interact with. And then we've taken it to the next level where we have the winners present to the executive team. And, like, it's just a sense of recognition. It's a sense of, like, hey, by the way, like, it also helps you get your budgets approved better when they see, like, the cool stuff your teams are capable of. And so that's one thing we've done. Another thing, we're trying to use tools like a Pecan to kind of take sentiment of the team. And it's a sort of an anonymous survey, but there's some interesting questions, and there's a lot more we could do there. But it's just the same idea of, like, checking in. So, okay, well, a lot of great content so far. Hopefully the audience has gleaned something from us talking heads up here. Let's now transfer over to you guys. So thanks for submitting questions. We have 26 entered. Let's start with the first one that was voted the most. How do you replace quick whiteboard sessions when designing system architectures as a remote team? Anyone want to take that?
Yeah. I'll say, this one's, I'll just echo, this one's really hard. Like, how is it, like, somebody on this call, like, go fix this. Like, there's a lot of smart people that are participating. So somebody needs to go fix this. I've seen a variety of approaches, none that seem perfect. Back when we were in the office and there was a whiteboard available, you'd see folks, using the whiteboard, at least those that were in the office. But that's not an option anymore. There seem to be no shortage of tools out there, ranging from something simple to, using, Google Docs or something like that for just kind of a collaborative artifact while you're chatting, to some other ones that are a little more tailored to, system design. That's the best that I've seen. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for this one, but again, I would call out, this seems right for somebody to solve.
Yeah. I will plus one day on it. I can tell what specific tools we are using, what we're doing, but I don't think it's been the equivalent of 3 people or like even bigger team, like in a meeting room, brainstorming something together, drawing lines and connections, and like making changes visually at the same time, because it's been more async. Couple of things we did was both for the technical architecture side of things and annual planning side of things, which happens more like financial exercise, but it's also annual planning is what drives headcount and plans for the next year. So we created something called Orange Docs. So we basically, for all the different whiteboarding problems we were trying to solve, we created templates for it. And if someone's kind of the lead on it, they start adding things into that template, and other people, we use Google Doc, and within the Google Doc, we create different templates based on what problem we are trying to solve. And then people comment on it asynchronously. When the comments sometimes get out of hand, that happens too, then we try to set up a small meeting to kind of resolve that and talk through that at the same time. But it's certainly not been as effective as using a whiteboard and all of us discussing it together.
Yeah, there's definitely a place where those high bandwidth conversations could really be great if they were in person. And I think every one of us feels like, wow, it would be great if we were all in the same room. Maybe if I could offer a couple things. One is, I'm actually sitting at my daughter's desk. Like, this is a drawing that she did. But like, the point is sometimes we just scribble some things on paper and hold it up to the camera. There's no harm in going back old school, so to speak. And like, if you're having trouble trying to articulate a concept, I've been in meetings where people scribble them down and like, this is what I mean. Do you see this? We've also done some more with, everyone has a favorite tool. Maybe that should be a question. But like, we've been doing more with a tool called Miro, which allows us to kind of do a lot of journey mapping and moving stickies around. It's not perfect, but we'll get on a shared call and start kind of collaborating around that. So awesome. Thanks.
Hey, one other thing I'll just add to this is,
please.
Even when you're doing just that kind of notebook, diagramming or drawing, I think what's really important, independent of the tool that you're using, the approach that you take, is to make sure that it's memorialized someplace, right? Whatever the outcome is of that architecture, the final architecture, move it to the tool that's been embraced by your company and get it out there so that everyone can see it. That's going to be more important than what you use.
Absolutely. Documentation gets more and more critical in this new world. Cool. All right. So we're going to the next question. What do you do to increase friendship and belonging in distributed teams? So that's a really good question. Either one of you want to go first on this one?
I can go.
Cool.
I think, I wish there was like more, this is the tool, this is how you can increase friendship kind of answer. Unfortunately, I feel like, again, I have not been fantastic at this, similar to the whiteboard problem. I know here we are talking human connection and they're like a tool, but that's something I feel like the random like hallway connections and those things are of course non-existent right now, but that's certainly been challenging, right? Because in the past, I would be like, do you want to quickly meet for lunch or coffee or drinks? That if as someone, especially because I've been at Etsy for so long, I knew a lot of people, and even if I'm not working with them directly, we would make time to meet for a meal or coffee or a drink and just connect over that. Now I feel myself more conscious to put something after 5:30 p.m. on somebody's calendar, because I don't know what their home commitments are. As a parent, if I have commitments, like they might have other kind of commitments, or even if they're alone, if they're sitting alone at home, maybe it's their time to get out of the house and go for a walk. So there are many other things, and I feel conscious about that. But having said that, on a monthly basis, if anyone reaches out to me, I almost never say no to them. I'm very glad people reach out to me, and I always try to make time and I feel I come out of it very energized and refreshed. So when those moments occur, I'm like, I should also consciously reach out to people. It might not be the same as I met someone for the first time last week, and I felt like, oh, I should, like, she's been there for 6 months. I had never met her. This is so crazy. And it was so great talking to her. I felt like I learned a lot from our conversation. Even though it feels like another virtual meeting, maybe you can't do as much as you used to do before, but making deliberate effort on one, when people are reaching out to you, making time for it, and for you to say like, oh, next month I will reach out to 2 new people that I have not met, because we've hired 100 people in the last month, and there's so many who are outside my org, and there are so many people to like know and learn from. So that's how I think about it.
Great. How about you, Dave?
Yeah, so great question. It's been really interesting to me to watch our teams, evolve and watch, some of our teams, have constant banter in their Slack channels. Like, you can tell that this is a very tight group of people that are talking about things all day long. And I don't even necessarily mean just work-related things. And then other channels I'll go to and they seem a little more quiet. And I've dug in on this to try and understand, like, what's the difference between these teams that, again, it seems like that there's really the special bond, and the ones where it seems a little more quiet. Not that those teams don't get along. And it's come down to, honestly, the level of energy that the manager has put into getting that team to communicate. And there's two approaches that I've seen. Some of our managers, in the Slack channel or otherwise, are constantly posting things there, right? It could be, just interesting tidbits or things that are happening in the news, but they are constantly facilitating conversation, right? And then you end up with these kind of derivative conversations that take place between individuals that they're not facilitating. And the next thing you know, right, all the momentum is there, and it's a chatty group of folks that like to talk all day. Not everyone is extroverted, and not all engineering managers have the time or the desire to do that. And the other approach that I've seen is bi-weekly or whatever kind of cadence makes sense, meetings where you get the team together and really just focus on that bonding aspect. There are online games. There's no shortage of things to do. Video games are an approach that people are taking these days, like, hey, let's have our meeting this week in Among Us or something like that, and that seems to work as well. I guess the bottom line is it's on us as managers. You can't rely on distributed teams to just start bonding. You're gonna have to facilitate it. You're gonna have to do something.
Yeah, it's great. And yeah, there's all kinds of stuff written up about, gaming nights and have a beer or the virtual drink together or tea. The only thing I would offer, in addition to all of the stuff that you can find in this great advice from Dave and Rachana, is just create some space for it, right? You're in a one-on-one meeting, maybe start with, like, how you doing? Maybe start with, show me what your office looks like. Show me around, like, make a connection on a personal level, or talk about a recent event, or, we work with people in different geographies, right? Like, what's going on in your country? I heard this was happening, or whatever. And you just create those bonds that strengthen, so that there is a sense of belonging. So great question. All right, moving on, and just we've got about 10 more minutes, so we'll keep going. The next voted up question was, what kinds of communication conventions and norms do you think are most effective, especially when working across distributed teams and continents and time zones? So yeah, communication, a lot of stuff here to talk about. Certainly have my thoughts, but maybe Rachana, do you have some things on how you might want to answer that question?
Yeah, there are so many things. So I'm trying to see, like, should we start with tooling? So he asked about, he or she, sorry, asked about norms, right, and conventions. So I would say I already kind of talked about, like, the transparency part of it, both when things are going well and not going well, kind of at all levels, right? If something comes up for someone at home, if you have a more open and transparent culture, they will feel like saying, hey, and I'm working on this, I had to finish this, but this came up, and can someone else help me? Or, like, where they don't feel penalized for being transparent and honest. And so I think, number one, that's really important. The second thing is, which is also, I think, helps with everyone being distributed, is, like, no siloed decision making. In the past, some of the things remote employees used to complain about was, like, if two people sit next to each other, they'll just quickly chat and make a decision. That can still happen on Slack or something like that. You can, send one-on-one messages. Or so being conscious, especially when the same amount of in presence and human connection is not there when everyone is distributed, being conscious on how decision making happens and how that information flows, right? Like, where people don't feel like they were kind of, especially because they're working alone at home, they're in a silos and not part of decision making. That falls, like, it falls heavily on managers to make sure the ICs on their team don't feel that way. And few other like simple norms and conventions like we have as most times we are on video, but I also get like sometimes my son is like shouting or hovering behind me, then I turn off the video. But just having what is your default mode and norms as a team, discussing that actively. What are your kind of overlapping working hours? Because like we need flexibility now. Everyone understands that. Just what are the norms for the team and basics like working hours and what are the video etiquettes, and it's okay if you don't follow it, we all understand it, but like the baseline for those things, I think discussing that is really important.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Dave? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, over communication is really, really important. And over communication to me is not only about, what's going on with the work that you're doing, but what's happening with you. And I think, I've seen this tendency with folks that work remote for the first time. They don't want to put out there in a Slack channel or whatever communication, tool you use. If something's happening, if they have to go to the doctor, if they're taking their lunch break, they feel like, nobody really cares about that. But the reality is, it's really important that you put that stuff out there, because if you're going to take an hour off to go lunch or do something, and people don't know that, they might reach out to you, right, and say, hey, I've got a question about this or whatever it is, and you're not there. And what's the perception? This person isn't really working, right? I ping them on Slack and I'm not getting a response. Had they posted, I'm going to the vet, or I'm going on a lunch break for an hour, or I'm going to be offline for a while, then everybody knows. And I've seen it be problematic in the past. And the solution, again, is over communication about, what's going on, with them.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I mean, I think just calendaring, right? Like a shared calendar for like when people are off, so people know what to expect. I think blocking off time in your calendar to know like, hey, look, I definitely try to set up meetings with people and they're like, I'm going for a walk block, and like, that's fine, right? You need to decompress, but like, and now the expectation, I understand. So those are all great things. And of course, we all struggle with the time zone differential. And, if you can, try to keep your teams within certain time zones so you have lots of overlap and business continuity. But if you can't, try to make sure that you're conscious about when those meetings, those stand-ups, those scrum ceremonies get scheduled, so that it's not always, centered around one geography that like it's convenient for them. So,
Dave, one more thing I just want to add that was really helpful for us is early on in COVID, where again, folks that weren't traditionally remote went remote, and everyone's trying to just balance life. Is, we went and we said to everyone that works at BR, at least within engineering, what does your life look like now, right? If you have kids to take care of, what do your hours look like? If you're going to be busy from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., that's fine, right? It's understandable, but just tell us what we can expect, because it helps us as managers and as a business, compensate for that. There's no judgment. There's no problem with it. Just tell us what it is so that we know. And that really helped a lot.
I mean, you're a wise man, Dave. You must have been building software for a long time. You're setting expectations with your users, right? And I think that's a really great lesson, right? Set those expectations. Okay, cool. All right, we got about 5 minutes left. Let's move on to the next one. What ways do you suggest to take an already high-performing distributed team and help them raise their level even higher? Come on, we all know the answer to that. Come to one of these webinars with us, right?
I was going to say hire somebody weak into the team, and then you bring the team down, and then you can raise the team again, and you'll feel like you've had a lot of success. So, and everyone will feel really good about that.
That's awesome. Rachana, how about you? Any thoughts there?
I'm still laughing at Dave. I think the way I think about either a high-performing team or individual is like, how do you give them the next challenge where you're challenging the work that they're doing, and kind of also how do you give them stretch assignments, right? Like, and if they want it and ready for it, that applies to both individuals and teams, and doing it consciously, having a discussion about it. And like, if I have it, like, as one way we look at it also, when we do like our annual planning meeting, if if there is a new interesting challenging thing, if you're like, oh, this team will be great at doing it, like for me that's an indication of that's a standout high performing team. And not just me, like all my product and design analytics partners also kind of collectively think about the team that way. And I've always seen those teams get like new really important business driving kind of projects. And I feel it's not about just, it's kind of about like helping them drive bigger impact to the company and our users is how I think about it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of goodness there. I mean, yeah, I think there's also like empathy, right? Like if you get these high performers to maybe do something that they haven't done, like, hey, you're responsible for onboarding this new person now, like you might learn how to make it better, right? And but yeah, there's no shortage of we're constant learners, I guess is the point. And like, let's keep learning. Let's also keep listening as leaders, quite honestly, right? Like every day you learn a new tool or a new best practice, or if you tried that, how do you give appreciation in a better way or more recognition or things like that?
Yeah, just what to add one more thing, it's also
Please.
being mindful of the times we are in, right? Just because someone is a high performer or the team is high performing, like in 2020, people had so many challenges, and we continue to have that. Like kind of checking with them if the team and they want to grow, how do they think this is the right challenge and do they want it? They might have new obligations that didn't exist before, so like balancing it out a little bit.
Okay, well, we have 2 minutes left. We could try to squeeze in another question, and I'll leave this up to Rachana and Dave, or maybe we could just end with a little bit of departing thoughts. Like, is there anything that you feel like you want to share that that we haven't covered? That might be a nice way to go out, or we could cover one more question. You guys make the call.
I don't have any deep closing thoughts. I think anything that I would say we probably covered, covered in the course of the question. So I'm up for answering another one.
Okay. All right. Let's cover one more real quick then. Any advice for a junior team? For example, a squad of interns or entry-level devs. Any like one piece of advice?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this one a lot. There's an opportunity for us to have an internship program this summer, and to be honest, I ultimately decided like we're not ready for it. And I think that's the question that you really have to think deeply about. We're all trying to balance, a distributed team, no matter how long you've been doing it for. Our hiring strategy is one where we've typically tried to avoid hiring super junior engineers that have never worked remote, because again, it's a challenging thing to do. So you have to know, not that you shouldn't do it, but you have to know what you're getting into. Your managers and your engineers have to be prepared to go above and beyond in supporting these folks, and not only getting onboarded to the software development world, but also this remote world. And it's a lot. So again, not saying don't do it, but you better be sure that you're going to put the time and energy and be successful. And if you're not sure, then don't do it, because you'll be doing a huge disservice to these folks.
So we kind of took the opposite approach in 2020 for the summer internship. I agree with Dave. It's a lot of work, especially in an all remote atmosphere, but we doubled down on having even more interns, because a lot of interns were losing their whatever hiring opportunity they had. So we took all the interns we had already made offers to, and created a new cohort in the last 1 month, focusing on data science and machine learning, and created a separate batch of interns for people who last minute ended up not having internships. It was work in 2020, and it was more work for managers and some of the ICs on the team. But also, what we have found the most beneficial about having junior and IC, besides them, of course, coming with new ideas and having a lot of energy, is also senior engineers crave mentorship opportunities. So it requires planning on part, both as a company overall, how to like not duplicate efforts, right? Like how as a company we can do this most efficiently, but also managers need to plan to distribute the work, assuming you have ICs who want to mentor and do all those things, where their ICs can take bulk of the work. And you have like, we do a few things, like there is a designated buddy at any given point in time. You go to them with questions. And we also, because it's a cohort, we also created specific projects for the cohort on the DSML side of the internship, where they could execute that within the 3-month time period. But we also had many like both social and connection kind of events for interns, like we would have similarly if they all physically came into the office. But it was certainly effort, but we thought it was great. We made an offer to a lot of them, and they will be coming back as full-time employees this year.
Great, fantastic. So you heard 2 points of view there. So everyone, we want to thank you for your time. Thank you for spending an hour with us. Hopefully it was useful, and we look forward to doing some more together again in the future.
Thank you.